Okay, thank you guys so much. I'm excited for our next panel, which is Decentralized Impact, How Blockchain is Powering a More Equitable Future. Please help me welcome up Stéphanie Fuchs of the CVA, who will be moderating. And we're looking forward to hearing some very interesting things from your panel. So please help me welcome her.
Thank you very much, Ellie, and I'm thrilled to introduce our wonderful panelists. We have first Marieke, please, from UNICEF.
Hello.
According to picture, yes.
Yeah, exactly. The picture is here, right? Yeah, 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Then Jemma Green from Powerledger, please, and Tobias Huber from Siemens, and some applause, please. While So it's wonderful to have you all here, and especially our great panel. You see, we have the opportunity to hear very different perspectives today. And that's why right now from the beginning, I think it's important that we understand together, what do we actually understand when we say equitable future? Because I think that's can be very subjective, and especially with your backgrounds. And I think that's why I would ask you to start. Maybe Marieke, we can start with you, and then Jemma, and then Tobias, that you give us a brief intro of you and your background, and then that you tell us a bit more what actually decentralized impact means for you personally, because this will shape, of course, the discussion, and also in your work.
Great. Hi, delighted to be here. Marieke, I like to say I'm a recovering CEO of FinTech and Crypto, now turned advisor and board member. I'm here today to represent UNICEF's initiative, which is called Giga. And I think this Giga is very relevant for the topic of today. 50% of the schools in the world are still not connected to the internet. And at Giga, we leverage blockchain to create a connectivity credit system to actually finally get the schools connected. And so to Giga, what actually decentralized impact mean is making sure that in a world where AI and access to the internet becomes very fundamental, almost as access like to water or to electricity, how can we actually make sure that the unconnected get connected, leveraging the traceability and transparency of blockchain?
Thank you very much, Marieke. And please, Jemma.
My name's Jemma. I co-founded Powerledger with my fellow co-founder John Bullich 9 years ago, and we set up the company really with the idea of the democratization of energy, recognizing that energy systems had gone from very centralized, from big power stations supplying everyone's electricity, to citizens playing a greater role in both self-supplying their own energy, but also providing energy into the grid. And the mechanisms for them to share energy really didn't exist. And the way that they were being kind of compensated for dispatching like excess rooftop solar into the grid was very, very blunt instrument with the feed-in tariff. So we developed software for peer-to-peer trading of electricity, really with the intention of having more dynamic and local price signals to allow people to take greater control of their energy future. And we also have got a tracking and tracing feature as well, because as there have been more types of energy put into the system and they're priced differently and sort of valued differently from a reputation perspective, particularly for companies, they needed a way to track that energy so that they can more legally and validly make claims about being 100% renewable, or also to inform purchasing decisions and procurement decisions so that they can meet their targets if they're in the middle of it. So we also have a marketplace for trading renewable energy certificates, which is in the US, because we could see that the market for that was very opaque and cumbersome and quite difficult to transact in as well. And we were an Australian company, but we moved to Switzerland nearly 2 years ago.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And decentralized impact, I think we heard already. I mean, two different fields, very important, and two different approaches to it. Now, Tobias, you're looking forward to hear more about you and actually your opinion.
First of all, thanks for having me. I'm a sustainability officer for the global solutions, services and software portfolio that we have. And having said that, when we talk about decentralized impact, then it's about bringing together infrastructure, so buildings and the grid, distributed energy systems, distributed energy storage solutions into one. So that means with the energy transition, we go into decentralization. Yeah? This is enabling the energy transition because renewable energy is not necessarily available at that point where you need it. So we have no longer the situation there's a producer and a consumer. We are entering an era where we have prosumers, where you're consuming energy, you're producing energy, and that all to bring together to the objective to have a resilient grid, resilient energy supply, low consumption as possible, transparency on the carbon footprint for our customers. That's more or less when you ask about the impact of decentralization that it would mean for Siemens.
Wonderful, thank you very much, and I think we are already intrigued, and I'm sure you will have a lot of questions. Just that you know, I will open up the discussion at one point, so be ready to ask your great questions. The persons here, but I get to go first because I have the mic. That's how this goes today. Not surprisingly, the first topic I would like to really dive into with you is energy and connectivity. I really think when we talk about blockchain, that's a core topic, and we already heard we are in the middle of big transformations. And Jemma, I think I would like to start with you, because just for you to know, yesterday Jemma was moderating a panel at an event of our sustainability working group at CVA. The topic yesterday was how blockchain is powering the next wave of real-world infrastructure. And we already heard this, right? This is already here a basis. And today, we dive one step further, right? And today, how is it powering a more equitable future? How do you see this? You know, also following up on yesterday, how this is really shaping it in this industry?
Well, I think they are intimately linked, connectivity and energy. Obviously, you need energy to power connectivity, and you can see that obviously with Giga, with the school kind of ecosystem, but equally with AI, the ability for AI to grow is predicated on electricity and like a lot of it, and the growth trajectory for AI would suggest inordinate amounts of new generation capacity that will need to come online that actually kind of defies, I think, gravity in terms of the ability to put that into the market very quickly. But I think we're going to end up with a lot of standalone power systems, which to be able to supply that, to get it online faster. And last night the conversation was looking at the kind of arc between centralization and decentralization, and that, I mean, we think about that a lot in Web3, but with energy, grids were not always interconnected. Actually, there were discrete little grids in villages and cities, and then national grids kind of emerged, about 100 years ago. But then as we've now moved from centralized power, as in generation from coal, gas, to a more hybrid system, which has a lot of distributed generation, a lot of the network infrastructure had to be upgraded to accommodate that. So transformers, substations, capacitor banks, the cost of that is so onerous and burdensome that the grid is, breaking from the cost. And so I think we're going to end up with more microgrids and discrete systems to deal with that, because the kind of tail costs of actually servicing these is too expensive, and the times to get approvals is too much for a lot of industry to wait for. So I think we're going to move from what was originally a distributed system that became national grid centralised, and now we've got hybrid distributed generation and centralised within like a centralised grid. And I think that the breaking point will be AI, where they want to get generation online. And you can already see that happening in certain states in America, where they're just sticking their own diesel generators online to be able to kind of, meet the growth in demand that they want to hit. So I think that's going to be quite interesting. We're going to, feel like we're going forward, but in some respects going backwards. But so I think that's going to be a big part of the energy story. And then the other piece is that there's a bit of a misnomer in energy where we're talking about energy transition, and it's just completely fake news, or more politely put, a misnomer, because we're actually in a state of energy expansion. If you look through history, where we started off with, coal and gas and nuclear being added into the energy systems historically, they never replaced the existing generation capacity. They just added to it because we're always consuming more energy than ever before. And the idea that we're just add lots of renewables into the system and we're going to turn off everything else is also just complete denial of reality, because we need all those sources of energy. And like what Tobias just said about it being, you need it to have the energy when you're actually consuming it. And there's a mismatch between variable renewable energy and when things are consumed. So you need dispatchable energy, which is gas-fired power. Also, you need stable and consistent forms of power to maintain the supply of the grid. So I think the discourse around energy is really, it's kind of an oversimplification, and it treats energy like it's cocoa beans, when it's far more complicated and than it actually seems at first glance.
Thank you very much. I think we already set the stage now, because we have to be aware the energy market and the energy industry is a very special one. And I'm very grateful now also for all the background information. And I would like to draw in now, Marieke and Tobias, your perspective. Because Marieke, I think it's very interesting with the Giga project, where we see where this is actually built up now from scratch. Also interesting maybe to be aware of, we have this physical infrastructure. This is one market with its own, dynamics, and then we have the services building up on it. But now I'm curious to hear your take on it, Marieke, and also your, Tobias, then to hear a bit more from your perspective, because they have a bit different also experiences in it.
Yeah, well, I think building on what you just mentioned, energy is fundamental to anything and everything, right? And so actually, one of the things is you can't get connected to the internet if there is no electricity in the place where you need to get connected to the internet. Sounds simple, but actually it's quite tricky, because, for example, at Giga, what we've been working on, it's a map, which is open source map of where are the schools and where can we see whether they're connected or not. And you can check that on Giga Maps. Now, the key with that is that for the places, so number one, actually, it's already very difficult to know where the schools are, whether you believe that or not, but most governments have lists, and sometimes when they give us the list, turns out that some of the schools are mapped to be in the ocean. Doesn't happen. So we need to remap all of that, which means that the team has developed actually machine learning systems with digital satellite images to be able to recognize where schools are. So we've been able to map the schools. Then we're able to map when the schools are connected or not. But the next frontier is really actually, it touches energy and on two levels. One is actually, it touches energy because, again, without electricity, you can't connect anything. So that's one. But the second part is also with our growing demand in energy, in particular for AI, then you get into a place where you actually also need to have more energy that's going to be available, not only to get internet, but actually also to get access to AI. And when we touch to AI, the concept that we're starting to see emerge is not only about connectivity, but it's also about compute. How do you decentralize compute, and how do you not have actually single points of breakage? Going on, more linking to why does decentralization actually matter, bringing a very concrete example, if you are dependent actually as a country or as a region on, let's say, Starlink, but actually don't control fully the contract or what's happening with that, then you could actually be at a place where you thought you had internet, then you don't have internet, and then everything actually breaks down, right? So being able to actually fully, map that, but also have actually more decentralization around that, we believe is really fundamental. It's one thing that I think we often talk about and don't necessarily realize, that access to data to know where things are and are not is actually not something that is that easy. So I mentioned the map for schools, but a map that is actually consistent for where everything actually has electricity and which type of electricity we have and where it is and which type of cable get to what place, those are actually data that are not often there. And so before building any system, very often one of our challenge becomes first like making the data readable, available to then be able to actually further solve the problem. So yeah, so the way we look at that at Giga is actually the system we're building is to think through what we call connectivity credits. And so where the system breaks is that there are aids from governments and there are aids actually to say, we want to connect the unconnected, but usually it gets stuck and it doesn't flow through actually the last mile and really like the schools that need it most. And it doesn't because the only people who can actually do the last mile are very small internet service providers. For example, in South Africa, there is hundreds of small internet service providers. Not like in Switzerland where we have 3 or 4. It's like every mom and pop shop can be an internet service provider. And they don't have the capital or they don't have actually the equipment that is needed to go there. So the system we've built is actually to say, well, how can we micro loan into that, and then once the school get connected, have connectivity credits that are emitted that give a consistent reward to the small internet service provider to be to continue wanting to do that. So yeah, so those are some of the things, but again, everything links back to energy. No matter whether you want to do connectivity credit or compute, you need energy first. So we layer on each other.
Thank you very much, Marieke. I think we have now heard also, and I think that's very important, and we tend to forget this here, depending on where we are, the perspective on this topic is completely different. And I think that's also a chance now today that we can hear, hey, actually, we have our perspective here. We are in our environment, but in other countries, in other regions, the discussions are completely different, right? We are talking about also alternative energies. How can we, build upon them, include them in our systems? While in other regions, we have to build up energy per se and make sure that we can actually provide access to it. So just as a brief pre-conclusion now in between, and now Tobias.
Yeah, let me pick up some statements from Jemma and Marieke. So you were talking about the distributed energy systems are at the rise. The grid is inefficient and outdated, not capable of the new, let's say, requirements from the integration of renewables. And you were talking about data transparency and the lack of data. So to picture that out, a building in the past was a consumer of energy. Now, if you put a rooftop PV on top of it, or you have a distributed energy system in place, they become a producer of energy. So now, if you have a fleet of buildings in a virtual power plant, for instance, they all together can share the produced energy and consume it according to their demand. Then you have now the transition to also electrification in the mobility sector with e-vehicles. So if you have your car parked and you don't need it for the next few hours, you have a electrical storage. So electricity that you can use while no one is using the car. So, and all these interdependencies that we have now and that are going to increase, you only can manage if you have access to the data, if you have, let's say, the intelligence to understand, to simulate, to forecast, to use digital twins, to see what will be the future upcoming scenarios. And that is where digital comes into play to bring that all together. But what's enabling is that we create energy communities. We break it down from the past with a large power plant and high voltage and medium voltage line down to a consumer. No, this is an energy consumer community. And that can be in the well-established Western world, but even more important, that can be in emerging markets where communities can come together and create their own and get more independence.
And I think if I can build on that, actually, I'm starting to hear about an idea which is communities can become more independent on an energy base, but also financially, because you could imagine a place where you have solar panels which enable you actually to do what you need to do during the day, but also you can probably mine bitcoins during the night, and then you can actually start becoming financially independent. And I think that loop that we're starting to see becomes micro community, which can then do what they have to do and invest in their own thing, and therefore manage their own connectivity and so on and so forth. So those are very powerful ideas.
I mean, what you just said there, Bitcoin is a store of value, and you've taken excess electricity, which could be put in a battery, but in that case is turned into
money.
Bitcoin. Yeah, and we've got a project in Austria which is doing energy communities with Energie Steiermark, and they are one of the larger energy suppliers there, and they actually developed the energy community concept for their business, like a product that people can sign up for, and it's households and also businesses. And they did that because they saw being customer focused as a retailer, energy supplier was a point of difference to attract new customers and also retain them. And yeah, they're now seeing that as like a very big part of their kind of growth strategy. And they want to get very, very granular, and for the users to be able to change their energy rates every 15 minutes? Every 15 minutes now. So yeah, when you get to that level of granularity data-wise, I mean, firstly you need smart meters to do that and to be able to extract that. But then with that data, you can actually be very responsive to what the grid needs and actually be a contributor to balancing supply and demand in a more capital efficient way. So rather than just being this passive consumer, you're not just selling energy, but you're also providing grid stabilisation services as well. And in doing so, avoid the need to actually make changes to the physical infrastructure of the grid, which is a big part of the cost.
Absolutely. I think it's also very interesting to have heard also about this project, right? What's going on. And I think to take the perspective a bit out again, to be a bit broader, I think it's what was very crucial, what we just heard, right, is this the development of this community thinking. I think that's really at the core, right? That's what blockchain actually started, I would say. And it's also interesting to hear it in the context of energy, because when we think of energy and energy sector and the infrastructure, I would say we are still in a very solid market. And I would because our topic is a bit broader, maybe take a step back, but build on this and talk a bit more, about the importance of infrastructure and who owns the infrastructure. Because I think I think now from your backgrounds, we have very different takes on this, but I just want to be, raise the awareness again. We are still talking about infrastructure. We need infrastructure. We need electricity. We need access to electricity. Here we are spoiled. We have electricity and we need it faster. In other regions we don't have it. We build it up. At the same time, we will not be political today, but I think when we talk about this, we have to be, I just want, maybe if you want to talk about it or raise it into it in our political developments that we see globally, in the western part, in the eastern part, everywhere. I think that can have an influence as well. Energy is power, access is power, and I think it would be good to dive into this topic again a bit more and look at it from a broader perspective.
Yeah, happy to start. So I think, building on what you're saying, I think it's very clear that we are assisting to a fragmentation, right? There's questions of sovereignty in every country. There's question of what do I own, and therefore what's my mandate. And I think within that context, therefore, there's a fragmentation of what's happening and who is taking what role. But talking about energy, I think even in the energy landscape, it's fascinating to, for example, take nuclear. Nuclear has been something that's been driven by very, very large projects, like 5 to 10 years, whatever. And now even that's fragmented. Can we have smaller projects that actually can do things that will be faster to launch? And I think we're realizing that because the point that Tobias mentioned earlier, but also like today, sometimes the energy is produced in places where we don't need it. It's not the place where it is. And so we're looking at other new, sources of energy. For example, something I'm also involved in, which is natural hydrogen. But again, this will be in the places where we don't need it. So you have therefore, I think several forces. One is obviously geopolitics, which is fragmenting and therefore looking back at more sovereignty and topics like that. But two, even from an energy perspective, what is it that you actually can do that is smaller and more implementable? Solar panels, I think, is a very good example. Is it the role of states to do big farms, or actually does it become actually something that, as individuals we can have on our home, and therefore also have that, mandate and willingness to want to be more independent? So I think there are several forces at play here that are probably going to converge in that, and that are going to help, foster even more this community and this decentralization aspect.
I think that's a very interesting take on this, from this perspective. Maybe Tobias, Jemma.
Should I? You want?
Go. Yeah, go first.
you started with the physical infrastructure, and I think to observe that, you need to really look on the individual stakeholders that you have. So you have utility companies. Core business is they own energy infrastructure. You have grid operators, distribution, transmission solution providers. They own infrastructure. That's core of their business. Then you have large corporates. Energy or the provision of energy, that's not non-core to their business. They don't want to own that asset. They want to have someone else owning the assets, which is usually an institutional investor. And then you have the private sector, residential and so on. Yeah, then you want to get more autonomous and maybe more resilient and less connected. So they have different interests. At the end of the day, when you now look on blockchain as an enabling technology, very often blockchain was disruptive because they could take out an intermediary. Yeah? And that's a bit of the dilemma that we have in this scenario, because somehow you need a grid. If you produce energy, in particular from renewable, which you can only control to a limited extent, you need to have grid connectivity feed into the grid to allow others to take it, or if you have more produced than you consume by yourself. So in this intermediary, at the moment we cannot take out, he's there. Yeah? And if you look like in countries like Germany on the actual cost of electricity for the kilowatt hour, then the cost for producing electricity is going down. It's getting slower. But what Emma said, with the outdated grid and the massive investments that would be needed to put to the grid, this is what drives cost up. And I think that is a dilemma that we need to work on to manage this intermediary in a better way or get less dependent from the grid.
Yeah, I think so too, right? The cost perspective and then also the incentives perspective, right? You heard from Marieke, she is thinking about how can we build incentives, and you Jemma, from your perspective, right?
Yeah, I mean, we saw incentives as a missing piece of the jigsaw puzzle, and the incentives that are in place, which, I mean, your comment was, oh, do we put small scale renewables or large scale? That was all driven through incentives, like contracts for difference and feed-in tariffs, and caused so many perverse outcomes that, you know, case in point with why Germany has the highest electricity costs in the world and the highest amount of variable renewable energy. It's one and the same thing. So I think as to whether you put in small or large, the answer should be whatever's the lowest cost. And how do you do that? Well, you need a market mechanism of some kind. And the software that we developed was really about how do you get a market mechanism that encourages the growth of renewable energy near to where it is consumed at times when it's needed. And you know, I think what we're having with the burgeoning infrastructure, because it wasn't done properly, is that you know, people will put up with centralised as long as it makes sense, and then they'll just no longer tolerate it anymore when it becomes too burdensome. And I think we're really at that breaking point where you know, networks will say, well, you know, we're going to basically, you know, smear all these extra costs onto your system, and you just have to suck it up. And they're going to say, well, actually, no, I'm not going to do that. We're going to buy the grid and we're going to run it as a standalone system. And I think you're going to see energy communities that are no longer going to want to wear those costs, and will start to come up with different means to do that. But I think the first place you'll see it is in business, where they'll put in standalone power systems to manage their own growth trajectory without having to deal with the bureaucracies of government and utilities, because they've had enough.
But I think also, if you look at recently what happened in Spain and Portugal, I think there's going to be call of conscience of actually, if you have something that's too centralized and if you have one point of failure, then actually the whole thing could go down. And you know, what we observe in Spain is that now there's also more people, we're still like far from it, but realizing that if you have a roof and you can put a solar panel, which is incentivized by the government, now what you need is a battery. And so I think things like that unfortunately are very disturbing, and actually hurt a lot of things, because for like 2-3 days, operations of most businesses were completely down, but things like that are probably going to accelerate the transition you're talking about to go, because it is breaking, right? There's points where it's whether it's from cost perspective or actually even just the physical infrastructure, it is breaking.
Yeah, I mean, we actually spoke about that last night on the panel, that the blackouts in Spain and Portugal were really as a result of a failure in energy policy from these too much renewable energy being pushed into the wrong parts of their grid, and it just can't cope with it.
Stuff. Yep.
And yeah, the countries that have higher penetration of variable renewable energy have a super polarised conversation around energy, because on the one hand you've got the advocates of renewable energy that are just saying, just get to 100% renewable, it doesn't matter if we have brownouts or blackouts, the planet's burning. And on the other side you've got people going, well, actually I don't want to have that, and I don't want the cost of electricity to be so high that I'm losing my job because that business and enterprise is moving offshore to a lower cost place. And I think we need to have a sober conversation around energy policy. Otherwise, that whole self-supply, I'll just stick in a battery. The network's response to that is, well, we're just going to give you a very high network tariff. And that's actually, pushing things even further to the fringe and encouraging people to disconnect. And I think it'll happen slowly and then it will happen fast.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think, first slowly and then it will happen very fast. I think if I can take a step back again, I think we have now heard what's actually happening in the energy market. That's also valid, I think, globally in general. If we talk about blockchain and the influence of blockchain, it's an international discussion, right? And it's in different countries, we have a different level of discussion, and we have different visions about it and different needs. And I think that that's a very important point also to keep in mind, what I take also from what we've heard so far, right? That it's the challenging part is really to find also a point of discussion across borders, right? And now I would like actually to open up to the public if you have questions at this point, because we still have a few minutes and it would be amazing to hear a bit from you. Carmen, yes? Co-chair of our sustainability group at CVA.
Thank you very much. I'm learning a lot. My background is healthcare, so I'm learning a lot about energy. I think there is this saying that people overestimate what they can achieve on the short term and underestimate on the long term. So my question is, what do you think is realistic to achieve with decentralized energy in, let's say, 3 to 5 years, which probably is a short term for the industry? And maybe the second question is, how will we know we get that critical mass worldwide or at the system level to say, energy has been decentralized, your mission has been achieved? It probably won't be in the next 3 to 5 years, so there are actually 2 questions there. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. Yeah, right to the point. I let you take it freely.
It's a hard question.
The hard part of your question is to say, to which extent will it be really decentralized energy systems versus larger scaled energy systems based on renewables? The easy part of your question is that with large organizations like International Energy Agency and others, you can already forecast and you see what the grid mix will look like in the upcoming years. Yeah, so to which extent we will have green electricity. Yeah, so that gives you definitely an indication what you can achieve, and large corporates like us, we work with that in order to decarbonize our own operations. We always keep in mind what will be the grid mix this year, next year, in which country. And then at the end, this gives you an indication how that changes. Where I would say the uncertainty is, and as Jemma said it before, it's very much driven by incentives. So tax relief, stimulus programs, all that kind of things. And this is something that politics make the decision on. Yeah? And this can accelerate extreme and can stop completely. Yeah?
And change very fast.
And change very fast, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, the difference between, which we kind of touched on, the difference between, say, Uber is that anyone could just get on the road and start driving an Uber. You can't do that with electricity to the extent that you operate within the existing infrastructure. So I think that what you'll see happening in AI, the way that those things are set up, the way they're financed, the way they operate, all of that will be like a kind of test net for how other communities will set up their own standalone energy systems. And so I think you'll see that happening in the countries where there's a big growth of AI, and then the adoption around these kind of alternative commercial models and business models will be adopted within those countries, and then other countries sort of on a tertiary basis.
Thank you, Ange. And I think now at Marieke, we have probably also another definition of short-term and long-term, I think.
Well, so I think, I was thinking because I'm like, where can I be relevant? So I think on your short-term, long-term, actually things are mostly, whether it's connectivity or whether it's actually the grid and electricity, things are very different country by country. So at least at Giga, the way we take things is we do pilots, because you almost need to crack things by country to then figure out what's the global model. And very often it's very tempting to think like globally and, we'll do this beautiful system and it will work. In reality, it never works. So within 5 years, I think having like stronger countries that are leading the charge because like you found a model that really works that then can be models for others, that's probably what we'll start seeing, at least in the connectivity space. And so much of this conversation, I'm also learning a lot, so much of this conversation is so relevant because incentives is also where connectivity breaks down. How to get there is also very different by country. Like there's many, many different parallels. But I think, so 5 years, countries, pilots, things that really work, and then longer term, then you can start emerging with maybe models that are replicated.
We have one more question in the back, and I get the red light already, so...
I'll make it fast. It's a great discussion. I didn't see it so much as a blockchain discussion, except for the idea of locking immutable data on the blockchain. I'm more interested in the idea of what we hear right now is this massive geopolitical battle for energy production, which is more about, it's not decentralizing, it's about competitive advantage, right? Trump wants Greenland for the thorium.
Yeah.
China has more nuclear deposits than North America, and the systems and the grids that they're creating are going to be leveraged against each other. They're not sharing infrastructure, they're not sharing grid strategies. It's really moved into a regional sort of conflict. So I'm just a little interested in opinions on where this is going, because it seems to be going in a really regional and competitive direction.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Share the knowledge direction.
No, none of that. Yeah.
The concern, sustainability concerns around energy were much more of a forefront conversation by large corporates, but you've seen quite a lot of them quietly remove their targets out of their annual reports and their sustainability reports. And I wrote an article about that in Forbes, and I think someone from Microsoft from the PR department contacted me and said, oh, could you change this sentence because, it's not quite explaining what we're doing. So, they don't like the attention being drawn on that. But the fact of the matter is that I'd say sustainability is not even secondary, or it's tertiary. The main thing now for big companies is just get as much generation online as quickly as possible. And most governments, with any sense, I would say, want to get a piece of that action and are thinking, how do we cut the bureaucracy to actually win the energy war and win the tech war?
I would see it in the sense of there are mega trends out there, right? And that's digitalization, that's urbanization, climate change won't go away. We are in it, so sustainability matters. And we should not get too much distracted from a 4 years legislation period, because these overarching mega trends, they will last for decades. And I think this is where at least large corporates take their orientation towards. Yes, you're right. At the moment, probably most of them are more silent in their communication, but that does not mean that they continue to walk the path.
Yeah, and maybe building on that, I think historically we've seen that. Like, when we were building rails for trains, there was like this rush, and then we've been like, there's been gold rush there. Now it's AI, and I think actually I really like AI is going to reshape so many things, because that's the battle, that's the frontier, and on how it's done. And the mega trend is really good to not get spiraled into what's happening, but like longer, where are things going?
Well, I think I I feel the nervousness. But thank you very much also for the question. I think that was a beautiful end out. Thank you for this great question. I think it sums it up. And also that we don't forget, it's not that we don't always think in these 4-year periods, but a bit longer. Thank you very much to Marieke, Jemma, and Tobias. It was wonderful. I learned so much. A big round of applause for this wonderful panel.